We're here with Brian Shuster. We will be talking about the nature of his manning innovation, the virtual world web. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
The first question that I wanted to ask was, what is the virtual world web?
The virtual world web is a collection of virtual worlds that are all interconnected. So millions of virtual worlds, commercial virtual worlds, private virtual worlds, much like the internet. The internet is made up of millions, hundreds of millions of websites, flat web pages that are all interconnected. And the virtual world web is similar to the World Wide Web. It works in a lot of the same ways, except rather than using flat web technology, it uses fully immersive 3D interactive technology where a user has an avatar. So unlike the web where you're sort of an anonymous, invisible surfer to a website, in the virtual world web, each user is represented by an avatar, and those avatars can interact with each other, they can interact with the environment, and they can interact with everything along the web of virtual worlds. So maybe getting a little bit more to the point, getting a little bit more basic, virtual worlds themselves are things like everything from World of Warcraft is a virtual world, even a Facebook game maybe like Farmville could be considered a virtual world. And right now, each of these virtual worlds, every virtual world that has ever been created that isn't within our system, is a standalone, independent virtual world with no interconnectivity. What we've done is we weave together the ability to network all of these virtual worlds. They're interconnected with a system that's akin to hyperlinking on the World Wide Web. And so a user who is using the virtual world web has access to not just a single game or a single commercial venture or let's say a store or a nightclub or a karaoke bar, which are all elements of the virtual world web, but they actually have access to all of these. And of course, that creates an enormous network, currently numbering millions of virtual worlds and growing quite rapidly. The virtual world web works in a very, let's say, it pulls the best of the internet and the best of game technology, which has been developed over the last 15 years or so. When I say game technology, that's the best of massively multi-user online role-playing games and the ability to have three-dimensional objects and animations, and it merges that with best of internet technology, the hyperlinking, the communications capabilities, and all of the infrastructures, which really creates a new kind of internet. And that's the objective of the virtual world web, is to expand on the flat web technology by incorporating all of the newest concepts and technologies that will take the flat web to the next level. And I know we're going to discuss that a little bit later. The operation of the virtual world web is really a technological synthesis that has been put together by me and my team of a wide range of technologies that we took what we learned. We've been in the internet space for a very long time. Many of the developers have been in the game space for a very long time. And we learned what really works, what hasn't worked. There are all kinds of intricacies that one doesn't have to deal with when they're involved in the internet. So for example, the community aspects, the interplay of when each user is represented by an avatar, how those avatars interact, how to give users the freedoms to have the emergent complexity of the web, but at the same time to limit the negatives. So For example, with the flat web, we have a lot of negatives in the form of viruses, in the form of spam, and in the form of malware. We have worked to structure this next generation of the web in a way where it's largely free of issues that have plagued the first generation of the internet, the World Wide Web, and become much more useful for a lot of different areas than the World Wide Web. I and my partner started out with a good understanding. I had developed many of the first generation of websites, and I invented and created and received patents on many real early web technologies. I developed affiliate programs. I developed the first advertising programs on the internet. I developed the first real practical free web hosting company, and along the way learned the limitations of what the flat web could do. And there were a lot of areas that needed new technology to break out, technology that just wasn't really available. So in conceptualizing what would be necessary for the virtual world web, I pulled on all of my knowledge and experience in having worked to make some of the structures of the flat web so successful, and assembled an amazing team of brilliant developers and marketing people and general innovators. And we, through trial and error and our best guess sort of operations, we went through multiple stages of development, proof of concepts, where we created early virtual world technologies and then allowed users to experiment with it. We learned what worked and what didn't work. We realized that the community in this case was really the key to a successful virtual world web. So we learned how to cultivate an appropriate community that was largely capable of self-policing, and established appropriate rules and gave appropriate freedoms, meaning appropriate capabilities of the users to generate content, and as I say, foster this emergent complexity where the community was able to build in the appropriate directions for themselves. And we monitored all of this. We listened to what people needed. We listened to what they wanted and what problems they had, and we took that all into consideration as we developed the infrastructures, all the way from the hosting facility and how virtual worlds were able to be hosted and the tools that were needed to build them and to appropriately texture them and to allow commerce to happen and to allow all of the myriad of things which would eventually become groundbreaking for virtual worlds and enable much greater entrepreneurial capabilities, efficiencies that couldn't be realized from the flat web. All of these things emerged from these trial and error and these proof of concepts, and we took it all the way to the point that we are now, where we've not only proved the concept, but we have an amazingly thriving business, an amazingly thriving virtual world web and community of users that's exactly transforming the way that the internet works from a flat web into an immersive web of virtual worlds. I guess these things aren't immediately, they don't immediately come to mind when one thinks about what the third dimension really adds. But there are whole areas of the flat web which, let's say, there are whole areas of the global economy and the Canadian economy which were just not impacted in any significant way by flat web technology. And that was very frustrating to me throughout my career dealing on the internet. And the virtual world web seeks to address those kinds of problems. So as a general camp, I say that the flat web is good for things that involve asynchronous, non-real-time communication. It's great for doing research. It's great for entering data into forms and receiving data, so booking an airline ticket, for example, if you don't need help. The virtual world web, on the other hand, is really good for communication that is live and interactive, and for things that involve three-dimensional space. So relatively easy examples to discuss. We've brought up the capability for users to impact the real estate space. And if you think about how real estate was affected by the World Wide Web, there are now websites for a house that you are looking to buy potentially. You may be able to see some video of the interior, you may be able to see some photos of the interior, but what you can't do is walk around inside the house. You can't, for example, if you live in Toronto and your parents live in Vancouver, it's difficult to get your parents to come and check out the house with you if this is a first home purchase. You may want input from friends and family. With the virtual world web, it's very inexpensive, potentially free, or at most a few $100s, to replicate a home that's on the market, and to have virtual open houses. And in fact, this has happened, and this is one of the main commerce areas that's a killer application of the virtual world web, which is real estate. And homes get designed in 3D, they become their own virtual world. You can have a 24-hour open house where a potential buyer can come in and examine the property. They can invite people from all over the world. There can be a real open house where you could have potentially hundreds of people from all over the world. In Vancouver, particularly important because many of the properties are sold to foreign investors. So for a foreign investor, rather than being sent a catalog of homes, they could actually come into virtual properties. They can go to 50 virtual properties in a matter of a couple of hours and inspect them. You get sizing perspective. Moreover, a potential buyer can clone out the property, put in their own furniture. So before they ever even commit to buying, they can decide how they're going to furnish the home, how their furniture is going to fit, what furniture they need to move, what furniture they need to sell. These are huge efficiencies in the home buying process. Commercial real estate is similarly impacted. Before a company moves into a new office, they can have a virtual replica of the office. They can virtually tear down walls. They can virtually reconstruct the office space, decide which department is going where, and it saves an enormous amount of time. Conventions sort of use that same type of real estate technology where conventions get hosted within the virtual world web all the time. Some of these conventions have exceeded 10,000 simultaneous users. They have lecturers and lecture halls with hundreds, even more than 1,000 people watching a lecture simultaneously. But the trade show floor, the booths, for example, no longer need real materials and real construction and real environmental impact. They're done virtually and they're spectacular. And they're done in the same way that one would recreate a home virtually. It's a few mouse clicks and a little bit of art experience, and using existing tools that we've built, one can construct, for example, an entire trade show floor. In fact, this happens all the time in the virtual world web. Other applications which are, let's say, more fun. One of the entertainment things that I just love about the virtual world web is the preponderance of karaoke bars. Users that might be afraid to go up and sing in public, but are stymied because the internet doesn't really have an audience. When you want to sing karaoke, it's hard to find a place on the web which will enable that. And if you do it, you're really just singing for yourself and posting a video. But within virtual world web, there can be, and there are, in fact, karaoke bars with hundreds of patrons. And when you go up on stage and you sing a song in this karaoke bar, you are receiving real-time feedback. Everybody's watching you, listening to you sing. You can be doing duets or whatnot, and it's a whole lot of fun and a lot less anxiety, although you still get the thrill of singing karaoke. Other entertainment aspects, like comedy clubs, like improv, are quite popular. There's education, which is obviously a big component here, where universities and institutions teach, and individual instructors, for example, will teach or tutor in all kinds of areas. The areas that I like to talk about are training on software, so everything from how to learn Photoshop or how to use Microsoft products, all the way up through high-end, highly technical software programs. And that's the kind of thing where you can have dozens of students in a class, or you could have 500 students in a class, and they can all interact with each other. They can interact with the instructor. They can ask questions. They can ask questions of a teaching instructor. It's very similar of a feeling to actually being in a class. Foreign language classes, another spectacular one where you can have immersion, you have voice over IP, and you have 24 students who are trying to learn German or Spanish or French, and they all can sit there with the instructor and speak in that language. So again, things that you really can't do with a flat web page, but which are really breakout technologies in the virtual world web. And there's just so many of these kinds of areas that commerce has left behind. I guess on the flat web, the last one that I'll touch on, because I could just go on and on, is retail shopping. And although retail shopping is largely has benefited from the flat web, there's a whole new revolution in retail shopping which is impacted by the virtual world web, and that's clothing, where user can go shopping for real-world clothing. They try on the clothes as virtual world replicas of the clothes, and there are enormous shopping malls within the virtual world web already. And the brilliant thing about the virtual world web and the way that it works for clothing is every item that you purchase, so you can try on, shirt and dress and shoes. You can purchase those items, they get delivered to you in the real world, but your avatar also has these items. And 2 weeks later, you could be shopping for a skirt, and you can wonder if the skirt is going to match the shoes that you bought 2 weeks ago. Well, you still have those shoes permanently now in your avatar's inventory. And so your avatar can try those shoes on with the skirt. And this is something which beats going to the shopping mall, where you don't have your whole closet with you when you go shopping. So there are real advantages extended to users in commerce and in shopping, again, that one can't get from the flat web. So I guess those are some of the useful capabilities. Like I say, I could talk. There are an unlimited number of areas that we've only just touched on a few, but I think those are good examples of areas that are where the flat web was unable to deliver on the promise of this enormous efficiency gains and enormous structural improvements to the way industries operate, that the virtual world web does deliver.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
How does the virtual world web involve individuals and businesses in content creation and expansion of the virtual world web?
Well, this again, lessons that we learned from the way that the internet worked and the way that the flat web evolved. And that is that users themselves are the ones who are going to determine what content is relevant, what content is popular, and this all needs to be done in a kind of a free market, free, open method. So what we've done over the last 8 years is really build and refine tools that we could deliver to users for those users to be able to build virtual worlds. And when we started out in this process, construction of a virtual area or a virtual world, the price to build just a simple virtual region was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. To build a full-scale virtual world cost upwards of $10 million, and you can look at examples of this, like there.com was a virtual world which had a $10 million plus price tag. Google had an enterprise called Lively, which both of those have folded, and Lively was many tens of millions of dollars for Google to construct. These things were enormously expensive. What we had set out to do was to take that pricing and just to break it, essentially to create tools that made it easy and efficient for anybody to build a virtual world and to assemble a virtual world with very limited need to have knowledge of software and programming. And that's where, in 2009, the Virtual World Web really was a breakout, when we delivered to our community and our population tools that allow them to, from scratch, construct a full-scale virtual world with all the animation capabilities, with all the texture capabilities, with all the ability to furnish, which we call propping, and so all the full functions, giving them the ability to set their rules in the world. So rules that range from who could access, how they could access, what their appearance would be, and how they could interact. And that led to things like business worlds where a corporation could have a boardroom, for example. They could conduct board meetings with members that were scattered throughout the world. They can use any technology like video streaming or PowerPoint or whiteboard, voice, and they can restrict access. They can restrict who is able to control the video, just as one tiny segment example. But and then you have elaborate playgrounds and shopping malls, and all of these things spring up from the tool sets that we've delivered to the community and that we deliver to users. And real estate is another great example. I know I talked about it just a little bit ago, but to be able to construct a house for a couple $100, which house back 8 years ago might have cost $1.5 million to create a virtual world of that home. Obviously, there was no way that the real estate industry was going to adopt a technology that was expensive at that kind of level. But when you bring it down to, for a few $100 there, you can have your listing now also appear in the Virtual World Web. That's a very appealing prospect to realtors and individuals that are selling their home. So by enabling individuals, providing tools to individuals, and really focusing on those tools, we empower the individual, we empower the business to construct and build their own virtual worlds. And we really were able to step back and say, this is now a test bed. Some worlds will succeed and others will fail, and they get to do that based on their own capabilities, the rule sets that they apply. So let me just give you one more example of a rule set. In virtual worlds that we ourselves have built, we often restrict the languages that users can speak in different regions. So if you have 1,000 users attending a convention, it is not helpful necessarily to have them 200 people speaking English, 200 people speaking French, 200 people speaking Spanish, all in the same channel. It becomes very confusing and disorderly. So what we will often do in those cases is break those groups out into, using our patented technology, into groupings where, based on their language preference, they'll see communication only in that language. But other parties that compete with us in the virtual world space are our users that we've empowered to compete with us may have different rules where they have language free. It's anybody can speak any language in the region. And the market ultimately is going to determine which of these worlds succeeds, in what areas it's worthwhile to separate language, in what areas it's not worthwhile to separate language. So that's one example of a rule that is used differently by different users and by us, and it's really exciting to see a free market enterprise and how they adopt the various rules and build their worlds appropriately for their target market.
What kind of intellectual achievement is represented by the virtual world web?
Well, simply put, I think that the virtual world web, the flat web just was and is limited. It will never be able to deliver on the full promise of efficiently restructuring market segments to be able to generate let's say, the most efficiency, the most profitability, the most economic way of delivering content and user interaction, and the intellectual achievement in a quick soundbite is the virtual world web is the next generation of the internet. The virtual world web represents adding a whole dimension to the flat web, and as one would imagine, by adding an entire dimension, we're going up an order of magnitude in efficiencies across all business segments. And whenever people imagine the future, at least in science fiction and projections of the future, the internet is always represented as the holodeck or the matrix, or a number of other examples that are maybe less household words. There's a reason for that, and that is that if the internet could become totally immersive, and one could, for example, attend the Super Bowl for a cost of $1 and have a box seat with all of your friends, and you don't even need to leave home to do it. You can watch the game and you can interact. Well, that's a huge breakthrough for the way that the entire world operates. And that's the promise of the virtual world web. I mean, the technology that we're talking about today is already breakout technology and is having major impact. But you project this technology forward by 10, 15, 20 years. The capability of having goggles and all of the haptics technology, which is being built exactly for virtual worlds, all of that comes into play, and we see that the internet itself inevitably must move to a three-dimensional, fully immersive, fully interactive paradigm. And that's what the virtual world web represents. It represents the transition from the flat web to the fully immersive kind of technologies that the future portends. It's the way we get from here to there, and that is how I would characterize the intellectual achievement that the virtual world web represents. So the virtual world web is novel and unique in a couple of different ways, depending on how you mean that question. It is certainly novel in as much as nothing like this has been done before. The flat web sort of evolved through a hodgepodge process, and that process created many, many areas of either failure, potential failure, or distress. The virtual world web, for the virtual world web, we really examined through not only our experience but also through research what those problems in the flat web represented, and how, if we were to throw out the entire flat web and say we're going to build the flat web, how would we do it now? How would we create secure communication, for example, so that you couldn't get spammed by your email, that there's just no way for that to happen, that you couldn't get a virus through your email because there are checks all the way across, and so we looked at those kinds of things, and we looked at the gaming technology and how the representation of users as avatars and the difficulties. I guess one of the things as a great example for how that works is one of the boundaries that restricts the gaming industry is that there are a maximum number of users that can inhabit any virtual area at any time, and there are all kinds of technical reasons for that. There's a logarithmic problem with it. As you go from 50 avatars in a region to 51, you aren't just adding a single avatar that has to communicate. You're adding an avatar that needs to receive information from all other 50 avatars and send its information to 50 other avatars. So that's very different from going from, let's say, 1 to 2 avatars. Going from 50 to 51 is an exponentially more difficult process. And there are limitations on how, so there were limitations on how many users could inhabit a virtual region. We looked at that from the beginning, and we said, if the web was designed this way, where only 50 users could go to a website, you would never have a Facebook, you'd never have a Google, you just wouldn't have economies of scale. There needs to be a way for an unlimited number of avatars to attend an event, to hit a virtual world at the same time. And so we looked at the problems with the flat web, we looked at the problems of the gaming industry, we synthesized solutions to all of these things, and those we're starting to see, of course, as part of this process. We are heavily invested in intellectual property, so we have dozens of pending patents and many, many issued patents on our breakthrough achievements and technologies and innovations. And we melded all of that technology into the virtual world web. So we have economies of scale. You could have 1 million avatars attending, let's say, a consumer electronics show. When CES wakes up and decides to do their virtual version of their trade show, which I imagine will not be all that long in the future, they're going to require having millions of avatars and enormous trade show floors. And so that's a capability that we have baked in at the very fundamental level. There's many other similar capabilities that we baked in at the fundamental level. I look at the flat web and I say one of the key problems that the flat web experienced was an inability for users to pay for services or content or merchandise in an easy way. And that was just a fundamental flaw in the way that the internet was designed in a non-secure manner. Of course, the internet wasn't designed to handle what it's doing now. It was really designed as a research tool. And so they never really thought about baking in wallet software. Instead, the internet relies on technology which was developed in the 70s for Visa and MasterCard. And essentially, Visa and MasterCard are the backbone of payment infrastructure for the internet. And the security of Visa and MasterCard is essentially pathetic. The ability to perpetrate fraud against merchant, against a cardholder is enormous. We've eliminated that by baking right in at the core layer of the virtual world web payment technologies that allow for secured, escrowed payments between one user and another without the need of a credit card. And so again, as just one more example of the way that we're novel and unique, is we thought through these issues that have plagued the internet, and issues which now are so sort of accepted that maybe people don't even recognize that they're problems, but we've known them from the beginning, we've dealt with them from the beginning, and we really put it all together into a package that resolves every problem that we could resolve, basically. And that's all been done in a very creative, thoughtful manner, and it makes the virtual world web novel and unique. Notwithstanding the fact that, like I say, nothing like it has ever been done before. The extent of virtual worlds have been single, individual, isolated virtual worlds, and for the first time we've assembled them, given the tools, and we have millions of worlds all under the same browser, essentially, all accessible through one portal, which is novel and unique in itself. Well, I suppose the easiest way to say that we've contributed to Canada is with the 60 employees that we have, and over the past 8 years, we've brought in between $6 and $8 million a year as, let's say, an exporter. So we generally bill users for these various services and access, and users get billed from the United States and from Europe and Australia and throughout, in fact, South America, really all over the world. And that money flows into Canada and is used to pay our expenses, to pay our employees' salaries. So that's really a direct revenue stream that's been flowing foreign dollars into Canada. So that's an easy way to see just a very direct economic impact. Of course, there are much broader impacts that have already been occurring, which are a little less tangible. Many users in Canada, and these users have their own businesses and their own economy that drives revenue into Canada. So some substantial portion of our user base is represented by Canadian entrepreneurs who've opened stores, who've opened clubs and various outlets. They work in the virtual world web. Many users, tens of thousands of users who are employed working not for us directly, but for commercial ventures that are involved in the virtual world web. And so there are entrepreneurs and there are employees of these entrepreneurs that are receiving revenues from being involved in the virtual world web. And further impact for Canada is the general reduction. I mean, there's an impact globally, and of course Canada is a leading country in protecting the environment, protecting resources. I guess we're probably going to get to that presently, so let's just say there's an environmental impact that has benefited Canada and the world. So those are all different streams of area where Canada's benefited. The Virtual World Web is a spectacular new tool to reduce the impact of humans on the environment. Trade shows are my favorite example when I talk about the environment, because really replacing real-world trade shows where tens of thousands, we've had trade shows, they range from 50 people to we've had many trade shows that have had in excess of 5,000 and up to 10,000 attendees. These are trade shows which were taking place in the real world. So you imagine a trade show in Las Vegas where 10,000 people have to come from around the world and get on airplanes and fly to Las Vegas, where enormous trade show floors need to be constructed out of actual materials, and suddenly that environmental impact and cost and harm to the economy all goes away. As users are able to attend these trade shows, the trade show booths are constructed out of pixels, it's all done digitally, the users attend as avatars, they actually are able to, notwithstanding the cost savings to the individuals and to the companies, because they don't need to pay $500,000 for a trade show booth, but they also don't need the materials to construct the booth, and people don't need to fly out. There are further impacts here just on an everyday basis. They're less grand in isolation, but in the aggregate they have a massive impact. Users are able to meet other people, actually have a full night of entertainment without going out and driving. So, if I'm able to wear virtual clothing and look sharp, and I'm able to go out with my friends to a comedy club, a karaoke bar, even a shopping mall, if I'm buying just virtual goods, those clothes don't need to be imported. So you don't have the shipping costs, say, from China to Canada. We're able to reduce the impact of the actual manufacture of the materials, and just the gas that it takes to go driving out to a club and to be out with friends. These are all contributors. You imagine again, let's say I propose that in 10 and 15 years, the environmental impact as the technology continues to improve and the immersion continues to improve, the impact is going to become more and more radical. So when business meetings happen and people from around the world don't need to fly to meet each other, don't need to have as many suits because the technology enables these meetings to happen from home, don't need to commute to work every day because at least most of their work can be done in the virtual world. All of these things start to have a cumulative impact that just reduces gasoline consumption, reduces oil requirements from taking materials, finished products and importing them, and reduces the impact on needing physical materials to build structures, so wood and forests that can be preserved. Very excited about actually the real impact on the environment that we have. Well, I will elaborate particularly on, let's say, a segment of Canadians. Obviously, all of these things that I've talked about already have an impact on Canadians, and I have gone into it. But one area that I haven't really had a chance to discuss is disabled Canadians. And this is an area where I get a lot of user emails And many of the emails talk about how I and Utherverse have changed their lives. Users who are homebound, for example, through a disability or mental, psychological disorder that aren't able to leave home or are afraid of leaving home, that these users suddenly have a whole new world open up to them. And I probably get 2 or 3 of these kinds of emails a week from users explaining how limited their life was up until now, and now they feel normal. They feel human again. They're meeting people. They're going out to events. They're experiencing life in a way that they just weren't able to do before. And one could argue, well, they could go on Facebook and they could meet people that way, but the tone and the forcefulness with which they're expressing themselves to me really indicates, and it's been my experience, of course. I mean, the reason why I'm cheerleading this whole effort is because spending time with friends in the virtual world, attending real events, really going and singing karaoke or seeing a comedian or going to a concert, those things are genuinely fulfilling. They really, after a night of interacting with people and meeting people and experiencing entertainment or shopping or taking a class, the user feels genuinely like they've been out, like they've been experiencing life. And I know that from my own personal experience in being in the virtual world web, and I know it from the feedback that I get from users. So expanding the horizons of people with disabilities is one of the real tangible rewards that I get from being in this line of work. I suppose another area that I can touch on is just how many people get married in the virtual world web. Last year there were about 1,000 weddings that took place. These are users who met other users in the virtual world web and went forward and had the marriage ceremony. And so, it's enriching lives of Canadians in that respect, where it's expanding social horizons, it's expanding the ease with which it's so much easier to meet and start a conversation with somebody as an avatar, but that doesn't mean that the conversations aren't genuine. It's easy to say something generally to the room and have comments go back and forth before you realize, I can privately communicate with this woman or this man and start something up. And clearly that happens all the time in light of the number of weddings which we ourselves know about. So expanding the social horizons, expanding the capabilities to deliver real life experience to people who have limits on those experiences right now, and of course Canadians experience these benefits as does every potential user of the virtual world web. But in the context of we're a Canadian company, and we do a significant amount of marketing and promotion here in Canada, Canadians disproportionately benefit from these advantages.
Okay.
For this one, I can say everything that I said before, but I have another point of view on this, which is that the virtual world web is an economic equalizer, an educational equalizer. As long as a user has an internet connection, so whether they're in the remote, distant north of Canada or whether they're in Africa, those users now would have, for example, access to top quality educators through Other Academy. So if they want to learn how to use software, it may not be possible in their village in Africa to get training on how to use Photoshop. But a professional Photoshop developer or programmer regardless of where they are in the world, can earn a real living. So it's a question of how do they get that training and how do they get the word out that they're available for work. And through the virtual world web, they can go to a class with people from the United States and Canada and France, and be on equal footing, get an equal top flight training course or full-blown education, and then go market themselves and earn a living and get paid the same amount regardless of where they are in the world. So the idea of the virtual world web is to elevate the education level globally, to provide access to top quality, Harvard or MIT, Stanford level instructors that can take any person who has a good mind and bring them the education that's going to provide for them for their entire life. And then at the same time, there isn't this disparity of, well, there's no Photoshop work to be done in this village, but they're suddenly expanded to being able to do that work on a global basis. And maybe Photoshop isn't the greatest example, it's an easy one for me to talk about, but for example, doing home interior design in the virtual world. So we call it a licensed decorator. And we have a program through Other Academy that trains people to become licensed decorators. And once they've gotten their degree, they earn a very good wage. And that wage is independent of where they work. This is work which is all done in the virtual world. And buyers globally pay the same rate, or the market rate, let's say, depending on the quality of work that's being performed. So for somebody in a really impoverished region, earning $10 an hour, that may be in a day more money than professionals in that village will earn in a month or a year. So opening up that kind of wealth, earning capabilities globally, the education capabilities globally, and ultimately and ideally bringing humanity together as not defined by the region in which one lives, but defined by the interests that one has, the pursuits that one has. That's really the objective, ultimately, of the virtual world web and the mission statement of the company, to provide access to top quality education, top quality opportunities, top quality entertainment to everybody, regardless of their location, condition, any of the other factors which may have prevented them from accessing all of that. And so I think that's how we've impacted the lives of people around the world, and how we're going to continue to improve the quality of life around the globe. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Brian.
All right.